Hello, my name is David Stevenson.
And I'm Paul Quattrocasas.
And together we are founders of Future Food Finance. Every 2 weeks, not always every 2 weeks, but most 2 weeks, we try and get together and we talk about an important issues in the kind of food tech area that we talk about on the website a lot. This week it's going to be slightly different. So I'm going to briefly skim over a couple of the stories that I think are out there, and maybe Paul have a perspective on them. And then we're going to go to an interview that I did, I think actually earlier on in the week, or maybe the week before, around precision fermentation with a fascinating Finnish startup that's backed by agronomics, and talk a bit about what does precision fermentation mean for investors. It's a kind of term that you may have heard a lot more about in the last couple of years. It's getting a lot of money in terms of VC investment. And I talked with the founder of that business a little bit about it. But first, I just thought I'd just talk about a couple of quick stories that I've been seeing over the internet over the last couple of weeks. One of which is we've had a bit of the public markets have had a really rough time for many listed food tech companies, but some of them are beginning to show signs of life again, as is always the way the market's cyclical. And I would notice that I think App Harvest, which is a kind of next generation greenhouse, sustainable farming, closed loop business, not quite vertical farming, but very similar to that model. Its share price has rocketed up in the last couple of months. And basically, I think it was up 50% last time I saw. And it shows that, you can eventually the price becomes right and eventually the sentiment turns. And I think that's really interesting. So I think that the public markets, they're fickle creatures. As we speak, they're having a bit of a tough time again. But you should be careful about becoming overly pessimistic about what's been happening with some bits of the food tech sector and just assume it's going to happen forever. It doesn't happen that way. And then the second thing, which I think is really interesting, is I'm seeing a lot more stories now around the whole kind of natural capital, regenerative farming, biological replacements for fertilizers. There's a lot more talk coming about that. There's a lot more deals happening in that space. And this is connected to the bigger theme that Paul and I talked a bit about. It's things like carbon sequestration, getting carbon dioxide back into the earth by new no-till regimes on farms and everything. And that's really interesting. And I would say that if I were looking at a sector where if I was looking at kind of trends of momentum in terms of public discussion, that whole natural capital, regenerative capital, biological fertilizers, carbon sequestration, that's a really interesting area. Paul, any thoughts on your side?
No, I agree with everything you say. And I would just add that on the note of precision fermentation, yesterday, April 21st, Upside Foods, which is one of the largest, or let's say most advanced precision fermentation companies when it comes to cultured meat, raised $400 million from Temasek in Singapore and the Abu Dhabi Fund, and also Givaudan, who's a strategic. So there's no doubt that this sector is starting to gain serious momentum despite what's been going on in the public markets.
Well, that's a perfect segue to talk a bit about precision fermentation. So I caught up with Maya from Onego, which is a Finnish startup. They're closely related to a kind of Finnish research institute that's done a lot of work in this field. And I caught up with her a couple of weeks ago to run through the investment implications of what precision fermentation is and why we need to think much more about it. Anyway, here's Maya. Okay, well, I've got Maya here from Onego. Onego, I think you're calling in from Finland, is that right?
Yes, we're from Finland.
Just let's do some basics first. You are basically developing an animal-free egg white. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
And you come out of a kind of research background as well. Tell me, just give us that background of how the company Onego came to come to prominence.
Yes. So Onego is a spin-out from the VTT. VTT is Technical Research Center of Finland, where this technology has been studied for years already. And now it was just the perfect timing and perfect moment to get this all packed together and to get the license to start manufacturing this outside of the VTT. Okay, so what I really want to focus on is investors have heard a lot about things like cultured or cultivated meat. And that's just become kind of mainstream now. Used to be called lab meat, but we're now called cultured or cultivated meat. But people are beginning to get their heads around precision fermentation.
So from an investor's perspective, what is precision fermentation, and why does precision fermentation make such a big difference for you guys at Onago?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to also see these differences between these different areas of the cellular agriculture. So I would maybe start by just briefly describing this. So you have basically like 3 areas. So yes, you have the cultivated meat, but then at the same time, you also have 2 other areas. One being the actual like biomass products, so that you're actually like eating those actual unicell cells. Corn is a good example of that type of product. But then you have the third area, which is the precision fermentation. And that means that you're actually using the cells, the microorganisms, as your factory, your little cellular factory, so that when you're giving sugar and nutrients and whatever is needed for these organisms, they give you that protein as a counter gift. So it's a little bit similar as a beer brewing. Yeah. That you have the microorganism, you give it sugar, and it then gives you the alcohol. But in this case, we give it sugar, and it gives us the protein. So we have just decoded these organisms a little bit so that it produces not its own proteins, but our proteins.
And that's just because there's lots of technical differentiation between these different bits of the kind of alternative food spectrum. That's different from using. Is that different from using enzymes? Apologies, I'm not a scientist, so is that different than using enzymes? And lots of big companies using enzymes. Is that different again?
Yeah, actually, this is a really, really good point, because it's not different at all. It's actually exactly the same thing. So this is something that has been used for decades already. Like enzyme making, for example, rennet is made exactly the same way. And if you think about the history, so this is exactly what happened with the rennet, that it was used to be a source for the calves. So you actually had to kill the young cows in order to get the rennet from their how many stomachs? I can't remember that, but. Yeah. But at some point, people realized, the molecular biologists realized that, okay, this is maybe not the most feasible, cost-efficient way of producing that stuff. So maybe we could actually produce that directly in the bioreactor. And by developing that, you were able to kind of like create kind of like a new industry in that sense. So having the animal proteins, but not coming from the animals themselves. So this is actually something that is not new at all. This has been practiced for decades already, but nobody really came to think about the animal, kind of like the food proteins before this. Yeah. So it's kind of like a new movement to make the milk proteins, egg proteins, and so on with the precision fermentation.
And I should say with rennet, just in case anybody doesn't understand, my wife's a vegetarian and she can't eat parmesan, for instance, because it's got rennet. So that's cut off the way it crops up. So okay, so actually, the use of enzymes in food, lots of companies do it. That's not that different. It's basically part of the same technology.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but your technology is not the same as there are other, for instance, very well-known American companies who are trying to do alternative eggs and egg structures in their products. Are they doing the same kind of fermentation as you are as well? Yeah, it's just to get into the nitty-gritty of how they're all a bit different.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Devil is always in the details. So there are different companies doing these similar things. And the main difference is the production technology, kind of like the efficiency and the scalability of those technologies. So you have, for example, yeast-based technologies. You have a fungus-based technologies. Then you have some others as well, like some bacteria and so on. But yeast has been the most well-known organism for this purpose. But now there's like an increasing number of companies now working with the filamentous fungi, because that has proven to be quite efficient as technology.
Okay, so then it's the kind of, I don't know if I'm using the right language here, but active ingredient. So a lot of it traditionally yeast-based, but it's new active ingredients like fungi-based that are beginning to develop new products. Would that be so?
Yeah, and actually, I mean, it's like who is your factory? It's like, is your factory the yeast, or is your factory the filamentous fungi, or what organism are you using? So there are different organisms that can produce similar things. Then it's just a question that how do they produce it? What is the scalability? What is the efficiency? What are the yields? And all of those things. So there are many opportunities.
And these still happen in bioreactors, is that right? So that's another thing that's come up. I mean, we sort of many of us might just have known of bioreactors, and I suppose the pharmaceutical industry, they use bioreactors to make medications, that kind of stuff. So these are done in big metal vats kind of pharmaceutical grade metal vats? Is that, or is it done more like brewing, where you've got an enormous big metal container and you just shoved ingredients in? What's the technological scale here?
Yeah, no, I will explain your whole process. But yes, indeed, I mean, it actually can happen in these really huge metal tanks, just the same as you use for the beer brewing. But what happens there is that first you start like with very, very small amounts, and then you move to a little bit bigger and bigger reactor. First, you're growing the actual microorganism itself. It's kind of like the same as when you have a cow. You know, first you grow the cow, and then when it's grown up, then you start getting milk out of that. So it's a little bit the same in here. So you first grow our organism only. So you grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And then at some point, you kind of like a little bit alter the conditions that you have, like change like the amount of feed that you give, change the conditions like temperatures and so on. And then it starts actually like segregating the protein. It starts giving you the protein. And then at the end of the process, which by the way takes like 6 days, you have the biomass, and then you have the liquid that has the protein dissolved in there. Okay. And then you filter away the biomass, and then you have just a liquid with the protein, and then you start like even finer filtering. Like a method, and then you end up spray drying the actual material out of the liquid.
So is your core market at the moment people who don't want to eat animal products, not people who might go, well, I'm not bothered. I'd like to eat less animal products, but eggs I'm not so worried about. But what's your core market at the moment? Is it effectively vegans and vegetarians who don't want anything to do with eggs, or are you looking for a bigger market?
So we are mainly thinking that this is going to be a food processing ingredient. Egg has very, very wide usage across all the food processing areas. But yeah, this is actually like quite often egg is the last product that is animal based, and then like everything else could be already vegan or like animal free. But yeah, we do see that it's kind of like a bigger deal, that it's not so much about that, like who wants to eat what, but we're in the middle of like really big crises in here. So like the climate crisis, the pandemic crisis, the food crisis, all of those are coming together in this approach that you really have to rethink the way you're producing these proteins.
And I suppose, it's not been reported much. I think it's reported a bit in America, but big chicken farms or whatever you call them, they are massive producers of waste, and along with the big pig farms. So there's a kind of environmental impact there as well. But can you also? Yeah. Sorry, go on.
I just wanted to still say that this bird flu thing is quite a big deal. It was just last week that they were slaughtered like 20 million birds just because the new kind of like a spread of the bird flu. So it's really a big deal that we really have to take this into consideration as well.
Yeah, and we're ignoring the welfare considerations, which are quite big as well. Could you also, if you've got control over the kind of production process, can you enhance the eggs? Or sorry, the animal-free eggs? Can you make it healthier? Can you? We begin to get used to people putting omega-3 supplements and stuff. Could you, in the future, once you've got the technology right, can you enhance the quality of the egg so you can maybe make it tastier? Just take the basic product and make it better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, you have really great questions in here. So this is exactly how we are seeing that yes, absolutely, you need to stay within the natural variation. So you do not want to like start creating like a synthetic proteins. You really want to be within the natural ones. But there is natural variation. There's always natural variation. And like who says that, is the hen egg like best for all situations, or perhaps for some cases even duck or whatever could be better. So yes, indeed, it is possible to modify slightly these functionalities, kind of like a stronger foams and stronger bindings. Maybe you need less of the protein after that. Yep. And then, of course, one obvious thing is the allergy question. Yep. So it could be, we do not have that yet, but we do see it possible that one day you could kind of like have same egg protein just without allergens.
So we've already said that there are lots of kind of like different processes that end up at the same end point, which is kind of animal-free eggs, and there are different ways of getting there. From an investor's point of view, what are the kind of key kind of due diligence questions you'd be asking about all the different ways of getting towards the end product?
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing is, of course, that I would check that the team really has scientific background, because there are also this is such an interesting area that there are also these teams who just have an idea that it would be cool to do something like this, and hey, just give us some money and then we would hire some experts. But it's a long route, so really having scientific background and really having already something that is feasible, something that is scalable, or at least a plan to have something like that. So that's super important. But also I do see that like links to different partners, different potential manufacturing partners, different piloting partners, understanding of the novel food approvals. So all of these things are really important.
One of the issues that I think your product raises is that a lot of attention's focused from an investor point of view on alternative proteins for meats, particularly getting rid of meat fundamentally from the chain. But actually, one of the most interesting areas is not really meat, but are kind of associated products like egg. As you say, egg is widely used in everything. In cooking. Milk has done phenomenally well. I mean, you're Finnish based, but Oatly in Sweden, very successful company, trying to do alternative, I think, oat-based milk. And then you've got collagen as well. So, I mean, I suppose the critical issue there is that let's just separate out that consumers do choose to buy different types of meat. Yes, you might say, I prefer chicken. I prefer a particular type of beef. They probably choose milk as well. Milk is something you might have a preference for. Interestingly, eggs, you're right, they're more of an ingredient, aren't they? They're and then collagen. I mean, hardly anybody chooses collagen. so
what type of, that's true.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm trying to get at here is that these associated products, they're quite interesting, aren't they? They're quite often the ingredients that go in to something much wider, and they might have bigger addressable markets.
That is true. And actually, I mean, they are mainly there because of a certain functionality. Yeah. And the reason why they are still used is really the functionality that is super difficult to replace with something different. So if you think about, I think that many people have been trying to bake without eggs, for example. Yeah. It's not so easy. I mean, of course, you can always now use chia seeds in here and crushed banana in there. And it's like how do you make a quiche with banana? It doesn't really work. So there are all kinds of things that basically could be somehow maybe possible to replace with something else. But then when you have the real thing, it just works so much better than the industries are completely still relying on the original ingredients. So that's really the reason why these are so important, because the market is just so wide, and it's really not only the consumer market, but it's really very much the food processing that is kind of the invisible part. And I have to really still say one thing, that when people think about eggs, for example, they're thinking about their own breakfast eggs, that I just buy these amazing organic eggs and it's so nice and I love them, but they don't realize that really, really huge loss of egg white powder, for example, is transported to Europe all the time. So it's coming from markets like India and China and so on. It's not regulated by any means. It's very cheap. It's very bulk. And nobody's really controlling that, what's happening on these farms. So there are like big markets that we are totally unknown.
Well,
unaware of. Yes.
True for milk as well. I mean, New Zealand, for instance, has a massive trade in dried milk that sells into China. I mean, it's a huge business. Okay, so it's got a wide range of ingredients. It's the ingredient that goes into a wide range of foods. Are there any other rival technologies for eggs that are out there? So let me explain what I mean. Is within in meats, there's kind of plant-based meat, and then there's cellular or cultivated meat. Is there plant-based eggs? Are there any other ways of producing animal-free eggs, or is it really only to do what you're doing, which is to kind of fermentation?
There are these animal kind of plant-based egg alternatives out there. And some of them are quite nice, especially when you think about like taste and flavor and looks and so on. But the only thing is that the functionality is really missing from those products, because these plant processes are not just working in the same way. And we actually do see that it would be a very nice business to really like help improving many of those products.
Oh, right.
That you might have a really, really nice animal-free egg alternative, and what you're just missing is this little functionality. And once you can provide that, then you have a perfect product.
That's very interesting, because one of the most interesting areas, I think, for instance, in kind of meat alternatives is mixing cultivated fat, or cultured fat with plant-based meat ingredients. And so you get the taste right. So are you suggesting, therefore, you could mix both plant and your biofermentation processes in one product?
Oh, yes, we are really envisioning that as well. And these hybrid products, I do believe that this is going to be the future. Yeah. Indeed. And for example, just as a very concrete example, it doesn't really make much sense to try to build the yolk part in the bioreactors, because that has so many different components. It's really like everything that is needed by this young bird that is growing there. So we really do not need all of these ingredients. It's very much like flavor ingredients and like smell and color and taste and creaminess, like a lipids and so on. So it is absolutely, it is possible to make these hybrids that create very interesting products by combining cellular agriculture ingredients, plant-based ingredients.
I just want to finish on the kind of question of scaling up. I mean, this is very much a live debate within the kind of alternative proteins, alternative meats sector.
Yep.
Lots of articles fluttering back and forth about having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build massive bioreactors, and because biotech pharmaceutical level grade bioreactors, and can you really scale up? What's your take on that? I mean, you've got a slightly different area, so you don't have to produce pounds and pounds and pounds and tons and tons and tons and tons of meat. But you are dealing with scaling up challenges. How do you? What's your pushback on those people who say, "Look, this is never going to scale up"?
Well, I think that we could be quite confident that this can be scaled up, because we already have the enzyme industry, rennet industry, and so on that are using exactly the same methods. Of course, the whole regulatory side is a different thing. Even though I do also see that in there we are kind of like on the safer side, because you have a process that is known and you have a product that is known. Only the combination is new. So that certainly takes some time, but we are quite confident that it can be handled. But then also what I see is a nice one in here is that this precision fermentation is actually based on a technology that could be incorporated to an existing plant. So you don't necessarily need to build like everything from scratch as a totally new process. You could actually take it to an existing process and just change some parameters and change some ingredients.
So could you, I mean, presumably, but do you still need biotech or pharmaceutical grade technology to do it? Or can you use, as you said, breweries already use precision fermentation in their own way. Could you use non-biotech or non-pharmaceutical grade bioreactors and technology?
Well, I mean, like between this beer brewing and the pharmaceutical, you still have the food grade, which is kind of like something that is still needed in here. So definitely it does need like very, very careful and controlled process, but it doesn't need a pharmaceutical process. So that's for sure.
So when do you reckon, I suppose the $64 million question every investor is going to ask you, when do you reckon you'll be able to scale up to get out to mass market? Are we talking a few years? Are we talking 3, 4, 5 years? Or closer to the end of the decade? When's your sense for the kind of time scale for scaling up to mass market?
Yeah, so we are currently just negotiating with these different types of partners. So we are looking into having the first FDA approvals during next year. And then after that, we will look into the manufacturing. Of course, it's like, you really need to have the novel food approvals before anyone wants to really talk to you like in serious discussions about this manufacturing. But I do not see that big of a problem. I think that it's 3-4 years is realistic.
Okay, very interesting. And do you think, last question, do you think we're more likely to see this as a first product on a supermarket shelf, or is it more likely to be as an ingredient with a food manufacturer? Where do you see that landing first?
Yeah, well, I actually do see that Not necessarily either of these. It's more something like, for example, like a fitness product, where the quality of the protein is super important. The price point is like slightly higher, or like this premium bakery products, confectionery products, where only little amount of the product is needed, and the quality can be like really high, and the price point is a little bit higher as well. So definitely we cannot start with the bulk market, but at the same time, like we think that it's not necessarily needed either.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Maya, and good luck with Onego. And we'll be watching over the next 2 or 3 years to see how the product emerges on the market. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So very interesting chat. And the only observation, pretty comprehensive, the only observation I would make is, as she was talking, I suddenly realized that actually a lot of precision fermentation, things like brewing, has been around for ages. So therefore, many of the issues that which people are worried about scaling up, a lot of precision fermentation technologies out there, they understand it all. And the other thing as well is, which I found quite interesting from a public market investor point of view, is the valuations on enzyme companies. So Novozyme is a classic example, but there's a load of them, and ingredients companies has always been quite high. And in many respects, what's going on in precision fermentation, I think, is really quite similar in kind of technological scale model to what's been going on with enzyme companies for as long as most of us have been on the public markets. So in a sense, when we talk about precision fermentation, it's not that radical. It's actually based on established technologies. And in a sense, its business model doesn't look that dissimilar from what the enzyme companies are doing anyway. So therefore, I think a lot of the kind of concerns that investors have had around a lot of the kind of food tech space, particularly around alternative proteins, I think probably fall away on precision fermentation. Paul, any thoughts?
No, I would just add that if I could leave the audience with one word to really think about in that context, it's exponential. That the developments that you've described, David, that have started with brewing and enzymes and so on with regard to fermentation are now continuing at an exponential pace. And while every company is different and every company has to be reviewed carefully by investors, the overall tide of this market is rising exponentially fast, and there's a confluence of technologies that are coming together at the same time to advance this development faster than any of us, I think, could have deemed possible. And I think that's what's most exciting about all this for me.
Okay, well, on that upbeat note, I think that's it. Thanks, Paul. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick romp through food tech and particularly precision fermentation. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time. You can find the show, remember, on Spotify. And in the meantime, as I said, we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. And eat well.
And sleep well.
Cheers.